Welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to create an Azure SQL database via the Azure portal. Let's switch over to the Azure portal and get started. Here we are in the Azure portal. Let's click Create a Resource from the top left menu. And now let's search for SQL Database. And let's select SQL Database from here and click Create. This visit will guide us through the information that's required to create an Azure SQL Database. So let's pick the subscription. I've got the free subscription, but choose the one you've got for this project and let's select the resource group. As we said in the last lesson, we are going to use the COVID Reporting Project RG resource group for all our resources. So that's what I've selected. And we need to give a name for our database. We are going to do project on COVID reporting, hence I'm going to call this database as COVIDDB, and we need a database server. We don't have one, so let's create a new one. So I'm going to click on Create New. And we need to give a name for our server. I'm going to call my database server as COVID Project Learn ADFSRV, and let's pick the region. I'm going to choose East US. We need to select the authentication method now. We can have the Microsoft Intra Authentication or the SQL Authentication, or you can have both. We haven't got an additional AD account other than the Microsoft account that we're using. So let's go for the SQL Authentication. And also, we need to give a server admin username and a password. So I'm going to call my admin as ADM and I'm going to give a password. Let's click OK. We don't have an elastic pool, so I'm going to leave that as no. And we're just doing a course project here. So let's select the workload environment as development, which will be much more cheaper than production as well. And let's configure the database now. By default, Azure has allocated 1 vCore and 32 gigabytes of storage. We don't need that for the project, and that's quite excessive. So let's click on Configure to configure the database and change the configurations. Let's change the service tier. We have a very less demanding workload for this project. So a basic tier based on a DTU-based purchasing model should be sufficient for us. So I'm going to select that one. And this is going to cost me 407 rupees, which is well within the free credit that we receive. So that should be sufficient. I would encourage you to use that as well. And this also comes with 2 gigabytes of storage. If you're wondering what DTU stands here for the purchasing model, DTU stands for Database Transaction Unit used by Microsoft for billing. Each DTU or the Database Transaction Unit gives us a certain amount of CPU memory and reads and writes, but these tiers gives us additional storage as well. So this tier, the basic storage tier, comes with 2 gigabytes of storage. That's more than sufficient for the course. So let's click Apply. And now let's select the backup storage redundancy. We don't need geo-redundancy, we just need the basic locally redundant storage, which protects our data against disk and the rack failures, so that's sufficient for our course. So let's click through to networking. So we want to be able to access our database from public endpoint, which is the internet. So I'm going to select public endpoint here for the connectivity method. And we also want to be able to access the database from other Azure services that we're going to create. So I'm going to select yes here. And also, let's add our current IP address to the firewall so that our laptop or the desktop, whatever you're working on, can interact with the database. So let's select yes for both of them. And we can leave everything else as default. And let's click Review plus Create. And as you can see, it's going to cost us 407 rupees 46 paisa in Indian currency, but if you are elsewhere, that will be in your local currency and everything else looks okay. So I'm going to simply click Create to create the database. Deployment's now complete. It took about 10 minutes to complete the deployment. So let's click on Go to Resource to go to the resource. Let's navigate to the Overview menu. As you can see here, our COVIDDB database is created under the server COVID SRV, and the pricing tier is Basic. And we've got the 2 GB of storage that we expected to see. Most of the other things you see here might be familiar for you from other lessons, but I want to highlight a couple of things which are specific for SQL databases. We created our database under the pricing tier basic, but in case in the future you want to upgrade it or change the pricing tier, you can just simply click on the hyperlink here, and that opens up this page where you can change the service tier, and also, you can adjust your storage size and things like that. The other option to get to this page is to click on the menu here, Compute plus Storage, under the Settings section of the menu. The other thing I want to highlight is the Query Editor menu. So once you've created the database, you would want to create tables, and you would want to add data to the tables or query the data from them. In order to do that, you could use the Query Editor. Let's key in the details of the SQL authentication user that we just created. I called my user as ADM. Let's key in the password. Let me click OK. And now I can write my queries here. Let me run a simple query to list all the objects in this database. And I'm going to click on the Run button to run the query. And that's brought back the results, which is great. But this is not the best interface if you're working with SQL extensively, because it doesn't have developer-friendly functionalities, such as IntelliSense, code formatting, etc. There are other desktop tools available, such as Azure Data Studio and SQL Server Management Studio, and they give you the additional functionalities we are after, and they're both free options as well. So I would highly encourage you to download one of those tools and use them. Azure Data Studio is available on all operating systems. But SQL Server Management Studio is only available on Windows. In the next session, I'll give you a quick overview of where to download the Azure Data Studio from and how to work with it. But before that, let's go over to the Overview menu and let's click on Pin to pin our database to our COVID reporting project dashboard. So let me click Pin, and that's been pinned now. And that's the end of this session. I'll see you in the next one.